Hey everyone! So it's that time again, a July wrap-up, talking about all the books that I got to read in the month of July. So I guess I am just on a roll. I'm a reading machine these last few months, and this month was no different. I read a total of 22 books, which is insane. I DNF'd 4, so 26 books that I'll be talking about in this video, but 11 of those were in separate reading vlogs, so I won't be going into too much detail. You can watch those vlogs if you want to know more in-depth thoughts. So let's just get into it because I have a lot of books to talk about. I'm going to start with 2 DNFs. This is the first time ever that I did not finish a book. I have never DNF'd a book because I'm just not that kind of person. I like to check things off the list. I like to get a book done. It seems just not right to put down a book if it's not finished. But I decided to do it. The first book I ever DNF'd, The Immune System Recovery Plan by Susan Blum. This is a nonfiction health book about autoimmune conditions that me and my husband started reading last June 2020. We got to, I don't know, 75%, and I was just sick and tired of seeing it on my currently reading shelf on Goodreads. So I decided, you know what, it's time to just take it off. I am not going to finish reading it. We're not going to finish reading it together. We got what we needed out of this book. This book is geared towards, like I mentioned, people with autoimmune conditions, specifically thyroid conditions, celiac disease, leaky gut, and rheumatoid arthritis. If you have any of those conditions and are seeking more information, a more holistic naturopathic approach to possibly curing some symptoms, this might be the book for you. My husband's specific autoimmune condition wasn't really mentioned in this book at all, but it did give an overall look at autoimmune conditions as a whole. Although there was some helpful information, particularly with like doing an elimination diet, this book was very boring to read. So it was a bit rough, but sort of made sense for the type of book that it is. So DNFing this totally freed me to DNF books, and now I feel like I'm a new person in my reading journey and I can actually DNF. The next book that I DNF'd this month was Red Clocks by Leni Zumas. This is a book that I mentioned in my most recent book haul, and this is a book I found in a little free library I've seen around. It is a book set in Oregon, which I want to do a whole themed vlog about books set in Oregon, and that's kind of why I've chose this one. This is a dystopian feministic book about women's health and reproduction, so it had an interesting premise, maybe on the lines of Handmaid's Tale, which I still haven't read, but I just could not get past the very explicit and descriptive sexual content in this book. It was very confusing to understand characters' perspectives. No characters are named. They're sort of just described, and it switched from characters and perspectives quickly without warning, and so it was just very confusing to understand what was going on. I was just kind of bombarded with very descriptive sexual imagery, and I didn't want to read that. Next up, I read 2 graphic novels in the month of July. I mentioned in my June wrap-up that I discovered a whole newfound world of graphic novels, and specifically nonfiction graphic novels that are somewhat like journalistic. The first one is The Ukrainian and Russian Notebooks, Life and Death Under Soviet Rule by Igor. This is a translated graphic novel from Italian, and it chronicles some major events that happened in the Soviet Union, particularly the Red Famine that happened under Stalin's rule in the 1930s. He criticizes Vladimir Putin. He talks about the Chechen War and famous Russian journalists that are murdered, kind of the cover-up that's happening. It was very interesting. I would say that it was a bit choppy, maybe because it's a graphic novel, maybe because it was also translated. So it gave good information and it hooked me and I wanted to know more, but then that was sort of it and it ended. So I would say this was a great starting place for me, and it has made me want to pick up more books and research more books about the specific events that were covered. So it gave a good overview, gave a good glimpse, but I want to know more. 4 stars for this one. And then I picked up Agatha, The Real Life of Agatha Christie. So I've actually only read 1 Agatha Christie book, and then there were none, and I only gave it 3 stars. As far as mysteries go, I think for the most part it was entertaining and interesting and I liked it, but I was mostly confused and I didn't actually really understand what happened at the end. that totally could be me, because I listened to it, the narrator was great, but I just sort of was confused. And I don't know if that's Agatha Christie's books as a whole, because they were written a while ago and maybe I just didn't understand, you know, the language and the storytelling. But I saw this and I wanted to know more, and if anything, reading this book has made me want to read more Agatha Christie books. But this is a lovely nonfiction graphic novel about Agatha Christie's life. This book covered a lot of the highlights that happened in her life, a little bit of her childhood, how she became the novelist that she became, her relationship with her first husband and second husband and kids, and her relationship with her publisher, and just the different books that she wrote, the different characters that she created, and the travels that she went on. It was interesting, and it made me get to know her a little bit more. And again, like I said, I'm more intrigued now to pick up some of her books. I know there are a lot of Agatha Christie fans out there. If you are one, let me know which book I need to pick up down below to make me maybe like her more than And Then There Were None. I did watch Murder on the Orient Express, the movie, and I enjoyed it. I do love a good whodunit. Knives Out is one of my favorite movies, so I think I need to try again with Agatha Christie. I'm just not sure which one to pick up because obviously she has so many novels. So if you're a fan, let me know which one I should pick up down below. And if you're a fan, I would recommend this. I think this is a great little novel about her. It's not like a thick memoir or biography or anything like that. But yeah, I enjoyed this one. 4 stars. Next up, I also mentioned in my June wrap-up that I started reading the Anne of Green Gables childhood classic series. I read the first 5 books in June and I finished off the series in July, so I read book 6, 7, and 8. Overall, enjoy the series. It sits somewhere at maybe like a 3.5. I liked it a lot overall. I think I maybe would have enjoyed them more if I read them when I was younger and, you know, had like some nostalgia with the characters. I think some of my critiques, like I mentioned in June, was that there were certain side characters introduced that I didn't really care about the story, and I just wish I got a little bit more of Anne and her family in some of the books, and I didn't care for some of the like random gossip that would be covered for a very long time. It would just be like ladies sitting around gossiping about people in the town. I did mostly enjoy the first 3 books of the series, and the last book with Rilla, I think it wrapped up the series nicely. But yeah, overall it was a fun time. Another childhood classic that I read in July was Holes. I listened to the audiobook with my husband because neither of us have ever read it, but I am a fan of the movie and I've watched that a ton, and so is my husband, and we had a great time listening to this on a road trip on our way camping. Sorry, battery died. As I was saying, my husband and I listened to Holes on a road trip on our way to camping trip, and it was such a fun time. At some points, word for word, the dialogue was exactly the same as the movie. My husband knows and loves the movie well, and he quotes it a lot, so he was able to quote as the scenes happened in the book. So I would say the movie adaptation is great. They did an almost exact kind of like replica of the book, but it was a great time. Overall, really enjoyed Holes. I obviously knew where the story went and what happened, but it was still very enjoyable, and I gave it 4 stars. Very nostalgic to read. Another childhood classic that I finished this month is Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt. So I picked this one up specifically this month because of Buzzwordathon, which is a year-long challenge to read a book every month that has to do with the buzzword theme for that month. So for July, the word was last. Tuck Everlasting. That's why I picked this one up. This is a reread for me. The last time I read this was in elementary school at some point. Don't quite remember when, but I know that I like this story and I know that I like the movie. I actually want to rewatch the movie at some point. But this was very enjoyable. This is a tiny book about a girl named Winnie Foster who lives in the woods in a small town in the 1800s, and she discovers and runs into a family that doesn't age because they found and drank from this fountain and stream that gives forever life. And then a whole slew of events occur that I won't spoil because this book is too short and not that much happens. But this was very nostalgic and enjoyable. I liked the writing and the imagery. Gave it 4 stars. I think there is one major detriment to this book, which is a creep factor, which I think if you consider that it was written a while ago, maybe it's not so terrible, but it is kind of terrible. The like romance in this book is a 17-year-old boy who likes an 11-year-old girl. That's a little bit sketchy, so that's like a major fault with this storyline, but I'm sort of just gonna ignore that, and I know that's probably bad, but I really enjoyed it and I like the writing and I like the story, and it's probably because it's more nostalgic. I think if I read it today for the first time and didn't know the story, it might be a little bit more like, Ooh. Another book that's been on my TBR for a while that I picked up because of a challenge is Girl in the Blue Coat by Monica Hesse. I picked this up for the Read Your Bookshelf challenge from Chantel. It is also a year-long challenge. I'll link the videos down below that I made for these challenges and that the creators made. And for July, the challenge was to read a book that starts with the same first letter as your name. So Gloria, G, Girl in the Blue Coat. This is a historical fiction set in Amsterdam during Nazi occupation. I originally heard of this book from Haley in Bookland. She recommends a lot of young adult contemporaries and occasionally young adult historical fictions. And overall, I enjoyed this. I gave it 3 stars. I liked it. I didn't love it. I had some problems with believing the events that occurred and the motivation behind some of the actions that the characters took and why they would care so much to uncover certain things. The main premise of this book is it follows a young adult girl. I'm not sure if her age is ever mentioned. It might be. But basically she has found herself working in the underground, smuggling black market goods to customers, whether that is sugar or meat or someone wants cigarettes. So she goes and has contacts, finds those rare things in the black market and delivers them to her customers. And then one day, one of her customers has been hiding a Jew in her home the whole time, and this Jewish girl just disappears and vanishes from her hiding place. So this customer asks this teenage girl to find this missing Jewish girl. She's sort of thrown into working for the resistance and saving other people and searching for this girl and uncovering the mystery. I think this is more of like a mystery, like find the missing person kind of book. But it wasn't amazing. It lacked some depth to it. Another historical fiction I picked up this month is The Children's Blizzard by Leni Benjamin. Not really a summer read at all, because this is dealing with a major snowstorm. But I picked this up because I won this book from Angie, the Science Mama. She has a historical fiction backlist book club, and this was the book club pick for June. I didn't get to reading it in June, so I just decided to read it in July. Also 3 stars. I liked it overall. I learned about a major historical event that happened, this big, huge blizzard in the 1800s in the Dakota Territory in the Midwest that killed hundreds of people, and those deaths were potentially totally avoidable if the weather network worked correctly. But a whole bunch of things happened that led to disaster. And this book follows mainly 2 sisters' perspectives who are both school teachers and the decisions they made and then the aftermath from those decisions. It was overall very interesting and I learned a lot. It makes me want to read the non-fiction version of this book that's actually by the same name, but the fictionalized version of it lacked for me a little bit. Particularly the ending was very unsatisfying, and to be honest, I just really didn't like any of the characters. They all sort of were just problematic for me. A good but not great book. Now the next book I'm going to talk about, I'm actually really confused about how this came on my radar. I'm just really not remembering where I heard about this from, but it is I Am 17 Brushes with Death by Maggie O'Farrell. If that name sounds familiar to you, she wrote Hamnet, which is a very popular historical fiction that released last year that everyone is loving about William Shakespeare's son. Now this is a non-fiction, technically memoir. Overall, I enjoyed this one. I think I gave it officially 3.25 stars. But basically Maggie O'Farrell, the author, has had some very crazy stuff happen to her life, and she has had many brushes with death, both with diseases and potentially a murder and a car accident and a bunch of other random stuff that happened to her, and overall it was a very interesting read. Another book I finished in July is Finlay, Donovan is Killing It by Elle Cosimano. This is a 2021 newer release mystery thriller, and it was very witty and fast-paced. It reminded me a lot of the Netflix series Dead to Me. I watched only the first season. It was also entertaining and quirky. The premise of this book is Finlay Donovan is a romance writer novelist, and she's writing her next book, and she writes like romance thrillers, and she has a meeting with her editor publisher in a Panera and is describing the premise of her next book about like getting the job done and hiding the evidence, etc., etc. Someone overhears that and then leaves a message saying, I'll hire you to like find and kill someone. And she is divorced, struggling to make ends meet. She has a bad relationship with her ex-husband who's like on the verge of taking away her kids. She's kind of this like messy stay-at-home mom, and her life is just totally falling apart, and she gets just wrapped up in this whole mess, and there's a Russian mob involved, and then there's like some side love interest, but she can't like reveal who she is and all the things that have happened. It was fun, maybe like a 3.5 overall. Really enjoyed it. Not a favorite book of all time, but it was a fun reading experience. The next book I'm going to be talking about is The Farm by Joanne Ramos. This was one of my 12 fiction books that I want to get to in 2021, so I crossed one off the list. This is a dystopian literary fiction, and it follows a couple different perspectives. One main perspective is one of the women who is a host, or a woman who signs up to be a surrogate. The other perspective is a woman who runs the farm, or the business that is this surrogacy business. And this book really critiques motherhood, money, and merit, and raises crucial questions about the trade-offs women will make to fortify their futures and the futures of those they love. So it had a lot of like monologue and introspection about like dealing with kind of bigger ethical questions about what it means to be a mother, and it had this overall lens of like people not being able to make free choices and the power that money buys you, because if you're powerful and wealthy, you could take advantage of certain people and certain things and get away with a lot. I gave this book 3 stars. I think similar to what I mentioned with the Children's Blizzard, I didn't find myself loving any of the characters. They all had issues, which is fine. No person is perfect. I don't want to read about perfect characters. It wasn't satisfying, and I think that's what I need, is like a satisfying ending and conclusion. It sort of just ended, and it didn't answer any of the questions that I had left. I felt like there wasn't any, like I mentioned, conclusion or character redemption or follow-through for the characters that had some morally gray, like questionable things happening, and I just felt a bit unsatisfied. Another book that I picked up in July is Dry by Neil Shusterman. This was on my summer TBR list, and I'm glad I got to it. I enjoyed the side series by this author in September and October of last year. It was an interesting young adult dystopian, and this was also a overall good young adult dystopian. I think I landed somewhere around 3.5 stars on it. This book is set in California in the near future. There is a major water shortage and the taps run dry, and there's no water anywhere, and chaos ensues, and it follows a young teenage girl and her survivalist neighbor boy that has a crush on her, and her younger brother, and then like a few other random teenagers that they happen upon eventually join their group. And it follows the span of about a week, and it's really a survivalist story, and they encounter some good people and some bad people. It was somewhat realistic in terms of I could see certain events unfolding, you know, in real life if that happened, and at the same time not, because one of the big like plot holes for me that I just couldn't wrap my mind around was that this was very much singled to California and like a part of California, but the rest of the world wasn't affected, and the rest of the US wasn't affected. And there were like little excerpts from news articles about, you know, people from around the world in the US like watching all of the events unfold, but then how in like California all of like the emergency services were failing and they weren't able to like help anyone and save anyone. I would think if the rest of the US was fine and had water, they would be able to get water to California, but kind of the whole point of this book is that it was impossible and a bunch of people died, and that was like a major like I don't know if that would happen, but it was a fun story and I enjoyed it overall. Like I said, 3.5-ish stars. So that wraps up like the random, you know, one-off books that I read, and now I'll just briefly go over some books that I read for reading vlogs. So these 5 books I all read for my bee-themed reading vlog. I'll link down below. The first fiction book I read was The History of Bees by Maya Lunde. I gave this book like a 1.52 stars. It was just very boring and the plot lacked a lot. This is a like sci-fi dystopian climate change, what would happen if all the bees disappeared kind of book. The other fiction that I enjoyed a lot was The Music of Bees by Aline Garvin. I gave this book 4 stars. This is a 2021 new release literary fiction set in Oregon in Hood River in a small town, following a beekeeper and a couple other side characters, and it was just lighthearted and emotional and lovely, and I enjoyed it. A kid's picture book that I picked up is Bruno the Beekeeper. I gave this book 4 stars. A great little kid's picture book. It is translated from Czech, so I felt that it was a little bit choppy, but it was very cute. And then 2 nonfictions. The first one, 50 Ways to Help Save the Bees, a lovely little informational booklet about how to save the bees, and it was very cute and had good calls to action, had tangible practical steps to take to help save bees. And then Honeybee Democracy by Thomas D. Seeley. I gave this book 3 stars, although it was so boring, and if it wasn't for the audiobook, I would not be able to finish this, because this is very much a dense scientific textbook about how honeybees communicate when they want to swarm, and it was boring and not for your average reader. This was really only for people who want to study bees in depth. So that was that. And then finally, my most recent video was reading like my Enneagram type, and I'll mention the books that I read for that. I picked up Hum If You Don't Know the Words by Bianca Morais. This was a book that was on my TBR for a while, a historical fiction set in South Africa during apartheid. I really enjoyed this, gave this 4.55 stars. A great read, and I'm looking forward to picking up the author's other book, also set in South Africa. The other one is The Female of the Species by Mindy McGinnis. This is a hard-hitting young adult contemporary, out of my comfort zone, and I knew that going into it. I gave this book a 2 stars. This book follows several perspectives from high school students, the main one being a girl whose sister was raped and died, and she takes revenge by killing the man, and she has serial killer tendencies. And there were some interesting things about this book, but overall it was just not for me. Then my Enneagram made me pick up my first Bachman. Britt Marie was here, and I did not connect with this book at all. I gave this book a 1.5. I was so bored. If you want to hear more of my thoughts and my apology, go watch my video, but it wasn't for me. And now I'm very nervous to read another Frederick Bachman. This Enneagram video also led me to 2 DNFs. The first one is Uncommon Type, Some Stories by Tom Hanks. This is a fiction book of short stories, and I could not connect with this. This is too strange for me, and I just didn't care, so I DNF'd it. The other DNF was My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing. It was just too much of a creepy serial killer psychopathic book, just not for me. I DNF'd around 30%, didn't really care to waste my time with that one. But one of the main positives from that video was The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. Gave this book 5 stars, a beautiful, incredible nonfiction biography of Corrie ten Boom's life, surviving World War II atrocities, concentration camp, prison, living to tell about it, sharing an incredible testimony of her faith and miracles that happened along her journey. New favorite book, easy 5 stars, can't recommend it enough. So that wraps up my reading month. I feel like there were a lot of just average and somewhat mediocre books this month, and some DNFs. So although the average rating was probably lower than usual, I feel like I learned a lot about myself, and I think that for August I need to slow it down. I'm going to try to not pick up as many books, but I'm going to try to just pick up ones that sound good and are highly rated and that I know I'm gonna love, hopefully. So that's my plan for August. We'll see what happens. Thanks so much for watching, guys, for tuning in. I appreciate all the love, the comments, the subscribers. It's such a fun community, and I'm really enjoying doing this, so thanks for the love. Bye!